Council of the City of San Bernardino, the Mayor and City Council of the City of San Bernardino acting as the successor agency to the redevelopment agency. Before we get started, we'll ask City Attorney Gary Sines to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I will happily do that, Mayor. Pledge our allegiance to our great nation. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome. Appreciate the Council's willingness to meet this special meeting. We will first take care of a couple of housekeeping. Please silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices and refrain from making any disturbing noises. The Council will notice that in front of you, you have a little different device, so I think you just press the button in order to speak. And I believe for the public also, they have the same device at the mic, so there should be a button there for you to depress. So with that, we will begin, and we'll ask Jim Smith to come forward. He's our first public speaker.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, and great to have these microphones. That'll help my hearing a little bit. Appreciate that very much. It's with a great and council people and the public that are looking tonight. I'm so excited that we've come to this point in our city of San Bernardino. As you well know, last November we passed overwhelmingly a new city charter. And now it's just a matter of implementing that city charter, and certain things need to be done. That was a culmination of many positive things that happened in the city of San Bernardino last year when we outsourced our waste management to Burtech, which is very positive. Everybody seems to be very pleased with that. And we also outsourced our fire department to the county, and of course many important things have occurred there as far as the infrastructure of our fire, and we're very pleased with that. Third of all, we did pass the city charter. That's what we're here for tonight. And last but certainly not least, thanks to our expert work by the mayor and our city attorney, we are soon to be out of bankruptcy. So it's a new day in San Bernardino, and I can't think of a better avenue to discuss this evening. As you probably know, we did, through the city manager's recommendation, we did authorize $200,000 for education for the new city charter, and of course now we've taken those funds and committed it to a very wonderful lady who's an expert in implementing new city charters. So I don't know how many of these meetings will be necessary. I think in the future, I think she can just bring some recommendations to the city council for their okay. But I understand that that's why we're here tonight, to have a workshop to understand basically what the procedure is as we move forward in this great city of San Bernardino. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the attendance of Councilmember Valdivia. Only item that we have to act upon, I believe, is item number 1, to waive the full reading of the ordinances and agenda dated today. Do we have a motion for that? Thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none, it's so approved. Next is item number 2, discussion of the city charter implementation. Review and analyze the memorandum from Special Counsel Kimberly Barlow of Jones and Meyer regarding charter implementation, including the immediate impacts of the new charter and proposed charter implementation work plan that identifies revisions to the San Bernardino Municipal Code, policies and administrative procedures, and provide direction related to priorities and review proposed ordinances amending portions of Chapter 1.08, repealing and replacing Chapter 2.02 regarding the position of city manager, and repealing and replacing Section 2.01.010 of the municipal code regarding the mayor pro tem to conform to the city's charter. With that, we'll turn the time over to the city manager.
Thank you. I do want to say one housekeeping item before I start. You may start getting texts from people saying that they can't, on the agenda portal for the city, that if they click on the video, it's not coming up, and that's because we're not in the room where the equipment is to allow that to happen. They can get on by going through the website. If they check our website, it will say very clearly how to click on the right web link to get the video for the meeting. But somebody who goes onto the web port or the meeting portal and clicks on video, it's not going to come through. So if any of you get text during the meeting saying that we're not available, we are available, but they need to go to the website and they can see how to get on, and they'll be able to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the follow-up to the discussion we started the other night at the council meeting. The council will remember Ms. Barlow, Kimberly Hall Barlow from the Jones Mayer law firm, who is retained as special counsel to work through implementation of the various aspects of the charter. I'm going to say this not for the council because you all know this, but for the public. There's still people who are a little bit confused as to what's involved with implementing a charter. It was already voted on, so why does it take so much time to implement? And the reason is that there are all sorts of ordinances and other documents that a city adopts that are pursuant to the language in a charter. Just like the U.S. Constitution doesn't cover every law of the land. It just sets the framework for the law of the country, and then there's all sorts of other codes and laws and regulations that are subsequently adopted that relate to the U.S. Constitution. Same thing for a city charter. So we have a lot of municipal codes. We've got employee memoranda of understanding. We've got administrative regulations. We've got policies and procedures and commission bylaws and all sorts of things that relate to the language of the charter that will take us some time to get through. Some of it is very high priority. Some of it isn't such high priority. There are certain things that are very complicated, like the transition of the sewer collection system that we're working on. And then there's other things that we have described in the past as just plain mundane. And the council had asked previously that when we do this, to keep bringing back pieces to the council so that you are able to stay abreast of what's going on, and certainly in many respects the council needs to direct that, and that's why we're back meeting with you. At the meeting the other day, Ms. Barlow brought in several ordinances, with 3 ordinances, I think, that dealt with issues that are the most critical time-wise in order to get started on the implementation. That's why those items were brought in first. During that meeting, a couple council members asked us, wouldn't it be good to have something that's kind of a guideline checklist of where we're going on all of this? And so Andrea Miller and Ms. Barlow have provided you with, I hope you all got it. I was thinking it was sent out by email last night, which I need one, by the way. That is our first effort at putting together that kind of a checklist to show you where this is all going. It's not simple because the pieces aren't always so simple, but it gives you an idea of where we're going on all this. So that's what I should have said at the start of the last meeting before we got started. But now, hopefully, everybody follows that, and hopefully the public understood what I was talking about. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Barlow to get started on review of the charter update.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass these out
I
just
got
in
one.
case you weren't able to print copy that we emailed to you, or you need a
And there's some
hard
coming
copy
this way
of
too.
this one here? Thank you. Let me tell you that this is a simplified work plan. The one that I'm working from in my office with my team actually has 5 more columns because it cross-references municipal code sections and other things. But it's very dense and intense, and I thought this would really be an easier way for you to see a quick timeline of what we're looking at. It is a very complex process, as your city manager has pointed out. We are gathering MOUs, for example, and other personnel-related matters so that we can both assist in the transition of the sewer function, but also deal with where should provisions about personnel rules be? Should they all be in the MOUs? Should they be in a separate document? How much should be in the code? How much should be in policies? So those are all discussions we're having at the staff level right now, and we'll be bringing you some recommendations about those, but it's not going to be quick. What I do hope to do very quickly, and as reflected with the ordinances that we did bring forward to you last week, and we'll be talking about again tonight, is let's get the big picture stuff moving and get the processes underway so that as we move forward, for example, the way that you handle the adoption of ordinances and resolutions is changed as a result of the charter. So let's get that moving so that we are actually doing it the right way as we move forward, rather than do a bunch of other things and then come back and fix that. So we're going to be coming back to you with some work sessions. I do believe that there are areas where I will feel comfortable, staff will feel comfortable making recommendations to you and just bringing forward ordinances. But there definitely are going to be areas where we're going to need some input from the mayor and the council. And specifically, your charter calls out some specific committees and commissions that are to be retained. And by law, there are some other committees and commissions that are legally required. But you have a lot of committees and commissions, and we feel strongly that your input is needed about which of those committees and commissions you wish to continue, which you might decide that you don't need any longer, how those should be structured, whether their job functions or duties should change. So that is definitely a topic that we're going to be coming back to you with for a study session like this in order to get your input. I would be the last one to presume that I know what you need or what you think you need in terms of committees and commissions. So that's really something that is going to be critical to get your input on. In terms of the work plan, just to introduce it, it's just a working document right now. This is not the last thing you're going to see. You're going to continually see updates to it. It's definitely not the final document. It is largely suggestion on our part at this point in terms of what we think you need to do and when we think you should do it, what's reasonable in terms of the work that goes into the changes that we are recommending, and making sure that there's enough time in this timeline for you to give us your input and for you to study and evaluate the recommendations that we're making. We've already started our meetings with staff, and we'll be continuing to meet with staff and with the department heads to get their input as well. And you will be hearing from them as part of this process, not tonight, perhaps, but as we move forward with recommended changes. As you can see from the work plan that we have in front of you, we've just sort of got some bullet points about what needs to be done as a result of the charter change, how we intend to do that in terms of what kind of work product we believe will be generated from that, and a tentative timeline for you. We are very open to hearing from you whether you feel that certain things should take priority over other things. This is not by any means me telling you, this is it, this is what we're doing. This is me making recommendations and asking you for your input. So we'll go through that in a little more detail in just a moment. What I would like to do, if it's acceptable, is review the memoranda that was provided to the council and mayor regarding the things that happen automatically and those things that we
are recommending to you in terms of prioritization. So we were asked to first evaluate what changes occur immediately. And you see that we, in the memo, I think it's, I don't know if these pages are numbered. Thank you. Yeah, we start with immediate changes required by the new charter. Just first, in that page, but above that, when we talk about prioritization, this is my sort of philosophy, and I think it makes sense, but I work for you, so if you don't like this approach, then please tell me, and we'll talk about another approach. But it seemed to me that the very first thing we should do in terms of priorities is take that big picture look, that 30,000-mile, what are we doing up here, and what needs to be overarching change before we start getting down into the nitty-gritty departmental and specific commissions and committees and so on. And so that was our approach. And you'll see as we go through the work plan that that's how we looked at it. So in terms of the immediate changes that really took effect as soon as this charter was filed with the Secretary of State, because that's its effective date. There's confusion about that. People sometimes think it's when it gets certified or when the voters vote it, but it's actually when it is filed with the Secretary of State, which was actually January 31st of this year. So one of the first things that happens is that you have a change in the form of government. You now have a council-manager form of government. It changes the role of the mayor, it changes the role of the council in certain respects, and it certainly changes the role and duties and responsibilities of your city manager. That happened. Now we have to do the things that are necessary to effectuate that immediate change. So that's one of the immediate changes. One of the things that we recommended in our work plan, you'll see, is although you already have a city manager, when a city normally changes its form of government, the code says, the law says, you're supposed to appoint a city manager within 60 days. So we're recommending that you do that. Because we don't ever want, I'm always going to err on the side of caution, so that you know. I'm never going to recommend you do something that leaves you vulnerable to some challenge or risk. So some of the things I recommend may seem redundant, they may seem unnecessary, but I'm going to err on the side of caution so that we don't end up in a situation where someone says, you didn't do that. Why didn't you appoint a new city manager? You were supposed to do that within 60 days. Now, obviously, the law that I cited you to in the memo is part of the general law. One of the things that your new charter does is it makes a lot of the general law applicable to the city. And so, again, erring on the side of caution, we do recommend that you reappoint or affirm the appointment of your city manager. And then we're also recommending that he reappoint or affirm the appointment of department heads in order to ensure that going forward we have our management structure in place. Was there something else specific were there questions about that component of it before I move on?
Councilmember Valdivia.
Thank you. Ms. Barlow, so you, in your written narrative here, you provided a date of January 31st as the filing of the Secretary of State.
Yes, sir.
So ideally, in the perfect world, within 60 days of that 31st filing, so March 31st.
Yes, sir.
In your recommendations here, you don't have a motion to suggest the reappointment. Can we make a substitute motion just to do that and affirm what you have just said? Is that possible? Can we do that tonight?
It can be agendized on your meeting for next week.
Okay, all right.
Yes. And certainly I think that should be done.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. I mean, this is a workshop, right? So
Correct.
that's why we're speaking up, and I'm speaking up, because I think it's important that we codify that action and make sure that we get him the reappointment process under the new charter. So I'd strongly, can we get that this council meeting, or, okay.
Yes.
And remember, they also did approve a contract.
That is correct. You did approve his contract. Some would argue that that's sufficient. Again, I'm going to err on the side of
All right,
caution
very good.
and recommend that you agendize it on your next
So
meeting.
it's still on the previous terms of a month to month, but it's just new reappointment under the charter.
Correct.
The new charter.
And
Very
we'll-
good.
And we'll just title it like reaffirmation of the employment of the city manager or something of that nature. By name.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you're sure welcome. There was a question, and we addressed it in the memo, about the city manager's ability to reorganize the staff. That's kind of a complicated question, because you have existing memorandums of understanding with your different departments. So those rules govern until the MOUs change. So within the confines of those MOUs and within the confines of a budget, in the absence of a budget amendment, yes, your city manager has a great deal of authority. Having said that, staffing changes in terms of what's in your, with the budgeted positions and so on, those are things that would come back to you for approval. So that's going to be a collaborative process going forward. It's not something that's likely to happen immediately. There was a question about the existing relationships of the city with its elected officials, and I know, Mr. Nickel, you had some questions about when and how elected officials can be removed in this situation, and I've brought some materials in case you want to have that conversation tonight. Basically, the charter specifically says everybody that's in a position now stays in that position. It affirmatively extends the terms of council members and the mayor to accommodate the change in election date. It does not do that with respect to your elected city clerk, your elected city attorney, and your elected city treasurer. Nonetheless, the charter says you're not going to reduce their compensation. You are allowed, however, to change their duties. And in fact, the charter actually does that to some extent. It changes some of the duties that were previously delegated to the city clerk, by way of example, business license function. And so that's a change that can be made. It doesn't detract from the city clerk's job. In fact, I'm sure she's happy to be rid of it. And that won't be a fundamental change as it's intended under the charter. So those kinds of duties, essentially the city attorney's functions don't really change. He continues to be your elected city attorney until he decides he doesn't want to be that, or until his term expires, unless he were recalled, which I highly doubt. But those are really the only three ways that his position could end early. Did you have a question, Mr. Nickel?
Well, are we just reviewing right now?
Yes. Okay. So those terms will continue. We talked in the memo about some of the changes that will occur with regard to the city clerk. We haven't brought forward an ordinance yet. A lot of the changes actually are implemented just by way of the charter. So there isn't a need to make a lot of other changes, but we will be doing that as well. Let's see, compensation. Once the, and of course you can set compensation, you can do it before you get to the point where you will be appointing a new city clerk, a new city attorney, but that compensation won't actually take effect until you make that appointment. You may decide to set that in a number of different ways, and it certainly, a lot of those positions are actually hired by contract, especially the city attorney, and so that may be one that you don't set by ordinance. Maybe you get recommendations and you choose to set that by contract, but you're not specifically required to set it by ordinance. The department heads, as reflected in the charter, will continue to serve as is unless and until they are changed under the direction of the city manager, because that now is his function. He is essentially the sole arbiter, except for some specific positions that are called out in the city charter. There was a question about whether one provision had an impact on another provision in terms of committees and commissions. The Section 101 of the charter is really intended to give the section, or the council and the mayor, the city, as much power as the law of the state of California allows you to have. That power is granted by the Constitution of the state of California. Believe it or not, it can actually be constrained by state statute. That's a frustrating thing for charter cities, but I've watched it change and occur over the years. By way of example, a new law was passed, was it last year or 2 years ago, that charter cities previously were allowed to basically, when they were dealing with local funds, decide whether or not they wanted to pay prevailing wages on public works projects that were strictly with local funding. The legislature passed a law that said, well, you can do that, but if you don't pay prevailing wage on your contracts, we're not going to give you any funding. That was challenged in the courts, and the Supreme Court said, no, that's okay. They're not telling you you have to pay prevailing wages. They're just telling you that if you elect not to, you don't get state money. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, as they would say, and that is one of the ways that the legislature has. The courts can always determine that a matter is of statewide concern, and therefore a law would apply to charter cities as well as general law cities. And so you're going to see that happening from time to time. A good example that doesn't apply to you because you already are divided into wards is the California Voting Rights Act, which not on its face does not apply to charter cities. In fact, it doesn't say it applies to charter cities. But on a legal challenge, the court upheld application of the CVRA to charter cities on the theory that it implements a constitutional guarantee for voting equality. And so this 101 section is really designed to give you as much power as you can have. What the provision 103 does is say, okay, but we're going to address certain things until they're changed. So Section 103 doesn't affect your ability to operate as independently as you want. It simply says these laws are going to stay in effect so long as they're not inconsistent with the charter until you change them. And that makes sense because you don't want to have no law in some particular area at all, right? We want to be sure that our transition under the new charter is orderly and that there's a placeholder for sort of everything going forward. Again, with the boards, commissions, and committees, as I mentioned earlier, your charter calls out specifically 3, but it also refers to this review committee for compensation. It's not really given a name, but it is a committee that you will be wanting to form. And in addition to that, there are 3 committees or commissions that are required by law, the Oversight Committee, the Planning Commission, and the Access Appeals Board. So all of those, we will be bringing forward provisions to implement those charter provisions and those that are required by law probably sooner, because we want to get those committees and commissions in line with what the charter provides. But we won't be doing anything with respect to others that are identified in the code or in resolutions until we get some further direction from you.
Councilman
Yes,
Valdivia.
Ms. Barlow, on the 3 required committees, the Handicap Access Board, could it technically be combined with another board so that there's not another hearing process? Could it be co-joined with another, let's say, the Planning Commission or the building, or somehow so that we can save time, energy, and efforts, and really the volunteer time from ad hoc or from a committee volunteer perspective?
Actually, yes, you can do that, and many cities have done that. They've combined a building appeals board with the handicap accessibility board.
Make that strong recommendation, because I don't think that, while I respect that right for individuals with access issues, I don't know that we often get those complaints. One of our biggest concerns in building and safety is that we do have that right provided for individuals with access issues. So I know that our building team is always kind of concerned about those issues, and very rarely do I see a claim or an issue, and if the rarity of that, I think would be prudent for us to just combine a board and take care of it.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can do, and if that would be a direction that we get, we'll certainly move forward with that. I would guess that when we go forward with a working session on your various committees and commissions, that you may very well want to combine the functions of a number of them. You probably have the most committees and commissions of any city I've ever worked with. I understand, sir.
Councilor Devitt.
Yeah, and on packet page number 13, to provide some fair balance, Ms. Barlow, I appreciate what you're presenting here, but the other side of the coin is, according to Section 600, the emphasis that I struck out in kind of my research and kind of evaluation of your narrative here is that the council may alter the structure, membership, powers, and duties. So those are it's a four-pronged component that the powers of the council still have on the membership makeup, the structure, the powers, and the duties
Yes, sir.
of those individual and respective committees. So we still have a lot of delegated authority on how to comprise those committees and the makeup and whatnot.
Absolutely, and frankly, there's good reason for that in your charter, because those are really policy decisions that this body and the mayor, as the policymakers for this community, should be making. We good to move forward? Oh, so that was the last. The one important point I do want to emphasize with respect to committees and commissions and boards is that each and every formally created committee, commission, or board must comply with the Brown Act. The agendas must be posted, minutes must be kept and maintained just as they are for this body. So if that, I don't know if that has happened or hasn't happened, but it certainly needs to happen on a going forward basis. And that will be one of the things that we will automatically build into any ordinances or resolutions that we bring forward to you with respect to committees and commissions. Okay?
City Manager.
I wanted to say, as it relates to boards, commissions, and committees, I think it's very important that we have an opportunity, every city has an opportunity from time to time to review all of its boards and commissions. I'm sure it's been a long, long time here since that was done. One of the things that is great about citizens committees is that you've got people who are freewheeling thinkers, and they will come up with ideas on how to make their community better, and a lot of them turn out to be really terrific and great ideas. One of the things that a city manager learns before long is that sometimes what they do is they want to turn themselves into oversight committees. And oversight committees, with the right definition, might be okay, but it often comes with a conflict of whether the city manager retains control over the departments. And so I actually kind of look forward to the discussion on all of that, because I know some of the commissions are actually thinking to themselves that they can do more for the community if they can be more directive in what they do, working, and because they love the town and they love the functions they're working on. I completely trust their motivations. But sometimes when you start talking about it, you end up with that kind of discussion on, okay, whose role is it to do what? And I think it's really important for us to talk about whose role it is to do what. So I look forward to those discussions, among other reasons, because it'll allow us to define that more clearly so that the commissions can really completely understand what's within their role, what's within the department's role, what's within the manager's role, and what's within the council's role. So I just bring that up because this is working very smoothly right now, and I get nervous when discussions like this are too calm. So I want to throw out those other little things that'll spice it up someday when we get to it, and I will tell you that those will spice up a little bit when we get to that.
If I could proceed, thank you for making it more complicated than it needs to be.
It's my job. It's my job.
Usually I'm spicy enough on my own, but okay. So just going back in our memo to what the priorities are, I just want to emphasize that macro view, because that really led to us bringing forward the first three ordinances, and surprise, surprise, we might have another one for you at the end of this meeting. But we really were looking at, let's move forward with these, and I really welcome this opportunity to go through those three ordinances with you in detail this evening so that we can bring them forward and you can begin your action on them. But first, it would be helpful to me if you tell me if I'm on the right page in terms of how I view the way this ought to be implemented. Big picture, you know, a little bit closer in, and you worry about all the little stuff down here after the end. So I really think of it as four categories of priority: the really, really important overarching stuff, the slightly more detailed but still highly policy related stuff, the more mundane but still important, you know, stuff, and then finally the stuff that, you know, do we really care who's in charge of bingo parlors? I mean, maybe we do, but there's a lot of minutia that's out there, and there are a lot of, I mean, I could revise every single ordinance in your code. If I did, you'd probably have half as big a municipal code. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave that to your city attorney and his staff. And I'm sure he's been busy trying to do that. This charter process is huge. What you guys have just gone through is an enormous, enormous undertaking. And this process of implementing is not quite as enormous, but it's still pretty big. So remember that what it took to get you to where we are, it's going to take a lot of effort to get you, to get you to the end. So I want to make sure I'm moving forward in the way that you agree before I move forward.
Councilman Nichol?
Quickly, could you just summarize the proposed ordinances that you intend to bring forward to the council at our next meeting?
Certainly.
Are they going to be at the next meeting? Or just, according to this is April?
No, we would.
These three will be on for Monday. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, they're actually fairly straightforward. I mean, the easy one is the mayor pro tem, because that's only one section. But if I do them in order, the first one is a repeal and replacement of Chapter 1.08. Your current chapter deals with, as it says, where am I saying?
Yeah, what page?
Oh, thank you. It deals with how you adopt resolutions and ordinances. So, and what the mayor does and what the council does. Because the charter changed the way that the votes are calculated and which people vote on which things, it was necessary to make these changes. And because this will govern the entire process going forward of how you adopt ordinances and resolutions, it seemed to me pretty critical to bring it forward early on. So the first change in this ordinance deals with the replacement of the charter section revision and the simple majority vote, except where the charter requires a higher vote, and the issue of the mayoral veto right. And it said previously disapprove. It's not really disapproval. Under the charter, it's a veto. You veto it or you don't. And so I like straight talk. I want clear, straight language that doesn't create any ambiguity. And so I have said, no, it's a veto. It's not a disapproval. So I've made that change throughout. It also makes clear, for example, that certain actions by the council are not subject to veto. And that's also spelled out in this change. Let's see what else I have here. I think there were some sections that we eliminated, say 060, and ended up, or maybe not. I don't have the old code with me right now, but this was mainly about the structure of how you do this, how long it, and I kept the time period the same. The 5 days, I didn't change that. You are certainly free to do that, But I figured I'm only going to monkey with the stuff I have to, and unless you tell me otherwise, or it's changes that I think have to be made to conform to current law. But the time period in which that process occurs was not one of those, and so I left it as is. Any questions on that?
I have a
ordinance?
question on that. The approval within 5 days, is that the following Monday? Is it starting with the day after the council adopts the resolutions?
Yes.
Which is typically on Monday, so it would be the next Monday?
That's correct.
Because then the 2 weekend days are not counted.
Yeah, normally, when we say business days, we mean business days. And also, when we say days, we usually mean days, but it's calendar days. However, calendar days never count legal holidays and Saturdays and Sundays. So that's under the code. So I would not, unless you want to explicitly say 5 business days, we can certainly do that. But that did not seem necessary to me.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the mayor pro. Sure.
I think one of the main changes with respect to votes of the council is that previously under the charter and the ordinances, it required 4 votes for the council to take action. Now it requires a simple majority vote of the quorum of the council present, so that if there were 5, for example, present, there would be a vote of 3, whereas before it would require 4 of the 5. So I think that's a significant change that takes place, and one that the council needs to become familiar with as they move through voting on certain items.
Certainly, that was a change that the charter made, and so this language reflects that change.
Councilmember Schrad?
There is a provision in here, in many cases, that the mayor is able to vote. That makes it an 8-person body, which does provide for the possibility of a tie, and I don't think the charter provides for breaking a tie in that particular case. And I think we do need to address that somehow. I'm not sure exactly where, but I'll leave that to Gary.
Well, if I recall the discussion when we discussed that when the Charter Committee discussed that, I was not a member of the committee. The intention was that those are very significant items that the mayor will be voting on, so it would require a vote of 5 of 8. And without that 5, if it was a vote of 4, then that had not risen to the level that should be adopted by the city. That was the thinking, if I recall. So it requires 5. So in other words, when there's a tie, let's say, for example, voting to determine the compensation for the city attorney, for example, if only 4 people are in favor of, then that's not good enough. We need to get a provision for compensation for the city attorney using that example of 5 members of the 8 in order for that to be significant enough.
Yes.
Doesn't that become some sort of an impediment to getting the job done? So in other words, we're stalemated at 4-4, and whatever we're voting on, we now have to wait to bring something else back, a new personnel or a new dollar amount or whatever the issue is. I get what you're suggesting, but there still is that possibility of a tie, and it just lingers whatever we might be voting on if we don't have the 5, if we don't have the majority. So
I appreciate that, and I understand the issue, but I think Mr. Sines is correct. In the normal course, a tie vote means the action doesn't carry, and so, or the motion doesn't carry. And so I have seen circumstances where a motion to approve was made, tied, motion to disapprove was made, tied. Essentially, nothing happens. That's where you all get together, not out. Right. That's where political discussion and persuasion and compromise happens. And that's really the most effective mechanism for addressing that issue.
And it has to happen at the dais.
It has to happen at the dais, absolutely.
But It was felt that those items were significant enough that they justify a 5 vote out of 8. So that's the way that thought was. It's similar to, I guess, that previously the charter required 4 votes. If there was not 4 votes, it just didn't happen. But that's...
Except that there was never the possibility of a tie, because there was always 7 members. Now we've got 8 voting,
Somebody was asked.
Well,
Because then the mayor could break.
and then the mayor could break a tie.
Or not.
So that really doesn't
Right.
work. So it needs to be looked at as all. I just bring that up for us to consider, and I think generally we're suggesting that this is an important thing, and we're going to kind of assume that if it's that important, that we're going to probably have a majority, and that's against the law to assume that kind of thing, I
Yeah,
think.
I think most of the things that the mayor votes on are appointments. And for instance, the committee considered the possibility that in the appointment of a city manager, it deadlocks 4-4, and I said, any self-respecting city manager doesn't want that job anyway. So that's not a good vote to be elected city manager on, so I think there are other examples that probably are more worrisome than that one, but it's not a very common circumstance in this charter, but there are a few. Henry's been trying to talk to me.
Councilman Valdivia.
Thank you, Mayor. Gary, for clarity's sake, you had suggested, I mean, that's, bringing this back home, I think, Mark, you said, you hit it right on the head. I mean, these are rare instances. I mean, the mayor doesn't vote all the time, correct? You have classified it as important subject matters, and he's limited in his votes. Is that correct, Gary?
That's correct. There are, I think, 3 or 4 different situations itemized in the charter itself where the mayor will have a vote, one of which is the appointment of the city attorney, the city clerk, and I believe the manager. And then with respect to compensation and/or termination of those positions as well, it takes a 5 vote. So those are items which are considered, I guess, well, I don't want to reiterate and be a broken record here, Fred, but those were significant to the point where without a 5 vote, we probably should reconsider what we're doing as a city.
All right, well,
was the
so to
thought,
bring this
if I
back
were-
home, my position is, I think the tiebreaker should be looked at. I agree with Fred that in certain instances, there needs to be somehow some provision or some deeper study from staff on what and if that opportunity comes on a tie. But I also wanted to clear the record for clarity's sake that we needed to, bring this back to the limitations of the power of the mayor to vote in certain instances. He's not voting all the time. He or she is not voting all the time. But for our viewing audience, I wanted to clear that up. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman Nichol.
Well, I take an opposite view of my colleagues. I respect your position, but I tend to agree with the position that if we can't garner 5 votes for these critical decisions, then we need to reconsider what it is we're voting on and whether or not those particular candidates or that particular matter is, in fact, being duly considered. So I actually like the idea of having to potentially confront a tie in these critical decisions that more or less forces us as a council to reach some degree of consensus before we pull the trigger on a major decision such as is outlined in the charter. So I actually like the provision as it stands.
Councilman Mulvihill.
And I'm in agreement with Councilman Nichols.
Thank you. I'd like to clarify something. In the event that the mayor is voting on an issue, does it require the entire council to be present?
I don't believe so.
It's just a majority of the council.
That's correct. There's certain,
It's a tie if the mayor's voting.
yeah. If the, yeah, and there very well could be a situation where someone is recused, and, but yes, the mayor has the right to vote on specific things without regard to how many of the council members are there, so long as there's a quorum.
Thank you. Councilman Shred.
To be clear on that one, does that mean that if he saw a 4-3 vote, for example, and he's eligible to vote, he could stop right there and say, okay, that's good enough for me, we'll leave it as a 4-3?
It would, he could choose not to vote. You all have that right, yeah.
Yeah, so just as anybody could abstain.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next one?
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one is pretty simple. It is the single section that deals with the mayor pro tem. And obviously, we've changed the charter reference and the name of the council. There are two, I also clarified. Thank you so much. I don't have the numbered ones. On the first page of that ordinance, right at the bottom, you'll see I just added some clarifying language because it said previously, city clerk shall be responsible for conducting the coin toss or drawing of straws. It just,
I'm sorry, where are you? Packet page 26. First.
the very bottom of the section. So I had some clarifying language there. It didn't change the substance at all. And then we added in the last paragraph of the section, the change that was made by the charter in terms of the mayor pro tem not being able to act as a veto. So that was a significant change. And I think the other, did we talk about, oh yes, the one suggestion that we are making to, is changing the selection of the mayor pro tem from March to December. Because you will have certified results by then, it seemed to us to make sense that that position be appointed as soon as you have certified results, so that you don't necessarily have a vacancy. So that was just a suggestion that we.
However, on the current position, I think it reads that the vote comes after after the ordinance is put in effect. In other words, are you extending the position of the mayor pro tem currently to December?
It sounds like it.
I think that's an interpretation.
It's totally up to the council.
But yes, I mean, for continuity, I think that would be helpful.
I don't read it that way, but that's okay. We'll deal with it when it comes time.
Or you have a short session,
A shortened term.
You could
right.
have a mini mayor pro tem. Yeah.
And again, I think that's really the council's discretion, if you want to have someone
Yeah.
for that short period of time, or if you want to just extend
Well,
the term.
As it's currently worded, you're correct.
It'd be from roughly now until December.
As it's currently worded, you're correct. It would have you appointing after this becomes effective, but that's
That's up to us.
completely up to you.
Councilman Valdivia.
So we can take up the issue, because we're not taking any action
Right.
tonight.
That's correct.
So when and if this comes up,
It'll be at your next meeting.
and we can discuss it then.
You can
and
discuss it, and if you want to
even
make a
take
change.
action on
On a
the,
potential
on the
appointment or-
interim position, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah,
It's on the agenda. Yes.
City Attorney.
Yeah, I just want to, for a point of clarification, I believe that discussion a minute ago, and I'm referring to, as an example, Section 400, which applies to the city manager, and the charter reads, "The mayor and council, by a vote of the mayor and entire council, shall appoint a city manager and affix the city manager's compensation as provided in Section 304B." 304B reads that the vote is required by this charter to be approved by at least 5 affirmative votes of the mayor and members of the council. So it can't just be a simple majority of a lesser number. It requires 5 votes, an affirmative vote, and that would be for appointment of the city manager, city attorney, city clerk, and their compensation levels would have to be by affirmative of 5 votes by the council.
Correct. That's correct. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Sines. If you're ready to move on to the next one.
Any other questions? Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. So the final of the first three deals with the city manager, and it repeals and replaces Chapter 2.02.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have them, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, you didn't do it.
Okay, so this truly implements how I read the charter and what was intended to change. Some of it, for example, if there were specific duties assigned to the city manager in the charter, I probably did not repeat them in this ordinance. There may have been more narrowly circumscribed tasks within that function that I may have identified. But again, this is a policy choice for the council. These are recommendations of the things that we believe, based upon the work of the Charter Committee and this council and the mayor, that were intended to be moved into or under the city manager. So we've made the changes that are necessary to conform to the charter in terms of the references to the charter, of course, including how the salary of the city manager is determined. There are provisions about he gets the same benefits and so on as the other employees, except as may be provided by employment agreement or resolution. It maintains his ability to create and maintain positions through council approval for assistance, and this is pretty much the same as the existing language. And then with the duties, which are in section 060 of the code, we took those that were in the current code that we felt should be either repeated or somehow revised, and we included those. And obviously some that are pretty critical to the city manager, council city manager form of government. So, for example, typically the city manager has control of the agenda, subject to direction from the mayor and city council. So that's the first item. The second item, when you have appointed city manager and appointed city attorney, I always do this sort of diagram. The city manager has everybody underneath him, and the city attorney has the people under his control and direction. But the two of them really work side by side. They're almost connected at the hip to serve and perform the functions that the council and mayor have directed. And so it's very important, I think, to spell out that you expect the city manager to confer regularly with the city attorney, keep the city attorney apprised of litigation, and so on and so on. And I think this provision is pretty close to what's in there already. Signing contracts and deeds when authorized to do so. Seeing that franchises, permits, and privileges are faithfully observed. Consolidating, combining duties, offices, positions, et cetera. Again, consistent with what is in the charter and consistent with the annual budget, which of course has to be approved by the council. To give direction to all department heads, other than, of course, those that are specifically called out in the charter, to investigate complaints, carry out the administration, deal with public property in terms of the restriction of access or closure. There's certain kinds of closures that would have to have council approval typically, but this is really about maintenance, repairs, et cetera. That's the kind of thing that you normally would expect your staff to take care of that would not come to council for specific approval. Exercise supervision over buildings, parks, and other property, except where the city council has designated someone else to do that. Designate city officers and employees to exercise their peace officer powers, including code enforcement citations, essentially, and generally supervise the public safety functions, and that includes serving as a liaison with county fire and with your police department on your behalf. ensure that the agendas are properly prepared, posted, and published in compliance with laws, as well as maintaining the books and records of the city. Oversee and supervise the staff providing services to the mayor and city council. You all will have, under the charter, the city manager is to ensure that you have people to serve your needs, and it should be the responsibility of the city manager to oversee and supervise those people. And also, obviously, ensure that expenditures are properly approved and documented, that purchases are done in accordance with the rules and regulations of the city, and make such administrative rules and regulations as he deems necessary. That's a function that he already does, and so this is just articulating that. As I pointed out, any one of these, except those that are specifically called out in the charter to the city manager, can be tinkered with by you. But these
Councilman
are our
Nichols.
recommendations.
Yeah, if I recall some of the discussions on the city manager's responsibilities, there were some items that I believe were added in the charter. I recall there was discussion about item C under 401, so attend all council meetings. The city manager shall have the right to take part in discussion but shall not vote. There was, if I recall, there was quite some discussion on the need to ensure that the city manager does attend those meetings. So I think, you know, I don't like to have two sets of rules where you have to keep cross-checking what's in the charter and what's in the code. I think for simplicity's sake, maybe some reference to Section 401, that the duties of Section 401 are herein incorporated into this section as well, so there's no ambiguity that
Well,
there's...
it is outlined on page 22, line number 12,
Yes, I did say in addition.
section 401.
Yeah. In addition to the authority and duties outlined in Article 4, Section 401 of the
Oh,
city
I didn't
charter.
see it underlined, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Yeah.
Line 12,
okay,
page 22.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
This
All
one, I
right.
apologize, isn't underlined because I made kind of wholesale changes to this
Okay,
section.
I
to
was
accord
looking
with the
for
new
an
charter.
underline there, okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Councilman Valdivia.
No, I totally agree with you, Henry. I mean, very good eye that you brought up the 401, and as I kind of just, you know, gave it a quick survey, I respect what you're saying. So thank you for that. My only, the other kind of opportunity, I think, is on packet page 22 and 23, line item number 26, section E, and line on page 23, line item number 20, section M. I think there would be appropriate mention of the spending authority limitations so that they do not exceed 4999. I think that's clearly within the auspices and care of the council. We've already voted on that previously. In fact, I didn't agree with it. The argument came before us about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. And Gary, I think you had your team look into the spending authority, and it was raised from a cap of 25,000 to 49,900. I remember clearly saying no. It wasn't good enough. I mean, it didn't pass the muster test for me. But I think if we're true to our word here, then I think those are good provisions to at least somehow mention under section E or M the spending limit authority that he has, because it certainly affords him the opportunity to get stuff done, right, under 49.9. If he needs to get it done, let's go for it. I think the council has spoken. But if it were to exceed that, he should come back before the council.
Of course. Mr. Mayor, can I just respond briefly?
Yes,
Well, I was just going to say that I disagree with that. I think the 49.9 is not enough, frankly. And I don't know that we should put it in stone somewhere that we can't change it at some point in time, either up or down, depending upon what we think is necessary. But to lock it in, where would it be locked in, for example? Where would the 49.9 be? Would it be in the charter? Would it be in an ordinance? Would it be a resolution?
Normally, you would set that by resolution.
That we
and-
could change at
Or, right,
some point in time?
right. Or
So
you
it's
would,
never locked in stone?
right. Or you put it in your purchasing ordinance. That's where I typically see those kinds of spending caps, is in the purchasing ordinance. I'm more than happy to put it here. I knew that we would be getting to the purchasing ordinance and dealing with those kinds of restrictions. So this is, I mean, all of this is flexible and fluid. And I welcome, if you'd like to include it here, we can certainly do that.
You know-
But it seemed to me that the
Yeah.
purchasing ordinance was the proper place for it.
That would be typical. This wouldn't change what it is today because that other provision already exists. You could put in here to be consistent with the limits set in other
It's vague
sections of the
enough, right?
code.
Yeah. Okay.
That way you don't have to change both of them if someday you decide it's a different number. But it should be here somewhere. It doesn't go away because you adopt this.
Right.
Assistant City Manager, did you have
So,
a comment?
when you look at the work plan, eventually our goal is to get to the various department level ordinances, finance being one of those, and so we will be bringing back several ordinances. We'll make sure that all those are consistent, and in here then we'll just reference that it's subject to the other sections.
Councilman Valdivia.
Mark, I'm grateful that you're at least thinking about this. And I know there was one objector, Mr. Charette, because I think, well, anyhow. Could we at least modify some of this verbiage so that it is, captures the spending authority and limitations of the city manager? It's always amenable. We can always change it and modify it.
That's all I'm suggesting.
But,
And what I suggest is that in here, we say that this, it's subject to those
Yeah,
limitations
all right.
that are set. So we only have to
fine.
fix it in one place if
That's
you ever
fine.
do want to change it.
I think that's the big check and balance on you, Mark.
Right.
And any city manager that comes, is that we have everything is a clear expectation, and the city council has given you so much authority, otherwise you got to come back to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilman Nichol?
Yeah, could you provide some clarification on the meaning of the first paragraph of section 502? It reads, each city department, office, and agency shall be administered by an executive appointed by and subject to the direction and supervision of the city manager, except the offices of the council, mayor, city attorney, city clerk, library board of trustees, and water board. Does that mean that the staff of both the council and the mayor are exempt from supervision?
No. As I saw it, it means, it's in the charter, section 502.
502.
As I saw it, that means the council and the mayor are not subject to supervision by the city manager. That's correct.
Okay, but it says each city department, office, and agency, so the office of the mayor and office of the city council
Correct.
shall be administered by an executive appointed. So there'll be, I'm reading it completely different.
Yeah, it's inconsistent in two different sections, but I'll tell you what typically is the case there is that in that particular case, it's not necessary to appoint because the community's already elected you, so election preempts appointing.
Well,
A person could then say, okay, if what it means is, and I don't think anybody would say this is what it means, but if it was read to say, well, that means the staff that works for the city council doesn't report to the city manager, then the question is, well, then who do they report to? Because
that's my question.
Because everybody needs to report to someone who can give them direction. A city council can't, I work for a city council, the city attorney works for a city council, but we work for all of you collectively, and we get our direction in public. The day-to-day direction of a city council staff can't be done by the collective city council because you can't have a meeting to give them that direction. So it's usually somebody on the staff that is designated that authority. And in this case, we're saying that the city manager would typically be the person who does it. I will tell you, there's an art form to this city management stuff. And when you have a mayor with a chief of staff, when you have a city council with a council staff, I know good and well that that what's good for me is to make sure that you all get the services that you need to get to be able to do your jobs. So I'm going to make sure that any supervision I do over a mayor or a council staff is done in such a way that it's going to work for all of you, or else I got problems.
What is the meaning of the word accept? E-X-C-E-P-T.
That those,
Except,
Well, I don't, for instance, the water department, is that one of the accepts?
Look, read it. It's here
water
in
board.
502. It says, "Except,"
Yes,
and I
but-
quote, "except
I
the
know,
offices of the council,
Council.
the mayor, city attorney, city clerk, library board of trustees." My understanding is the city clerk oversees her staff, right?
that's right,
Okay. The city attorney oversees his staff, right?
correct.
Okay. And from what I'm reading in the charter, so too does the mayor, and so too do the city council.
Okay, but in each of those cases, there's somebody who's in a position to be able to do that. In this particular case, the city council cannot provide that direction. You could argue that a mayor can. You could argue that, but where's the provision in the charter for the mayor to be a supervisor of a staff person?
I'm just reading from the charter, and I see a potential contradiction with section L on packet page 23, which says,
Yeah.
"Oversee and supervise the staff providing services to
You're
the mayor and city council." It
You're right,
appears
but-
to be a contradiction.
There is an argument that those are contradictory provisions because of the technical reading. I would argue that this was one that just kind of slipped through in our language, and that in fact the mayor and the council staff wouldn't have made sense to have been left in as needing an appointee to be in charge of supervising them. Who would be the appointee?
Well, that's why we're having this discussion, because I'm trying to follow the letter and intent and spirit of the charter, which clearly uses the word "except." And my thinking is that we need to develop some kind of an ordinance that allows the mayor and the council to appoint their executive.
You can't do it, Henry.
Well, the charter says we should. There-
Well, you could.
We could.
I agree that you could. You could actually adopt an ordinance that says we're going to have the city council have a designated position of executive of 2 other people. And that person will then be the supervisor of the council staff. Well,
If we could, if you take a look at it, it says except the offices. It doesn't necessarily say the staff of the council or the mayor. It says the offices. So that is the council, which you are all
Well-
officers, and the mayor that is also an officer.
Well, when I think of
And so-
offices, I think of the staff of those offices, too. What does offices mean? What is it, just I don't think it's an
But that-
ambiguous
But
term.
that could be clarified.
I think it does need some
So-
clarification, because I think this might be a sticky point for future councils and mayors that may wish to exercise authority that is in the charter, that if we don't make it very clear, this could get ugly, depending on who's sitting in those seats.
you're
And I don't want to see friction between the city manager and staff and these elected officials with different interpretations of our charter.
I understand that.
for what it's
Councilman
worth,
Chair.
I do, oh, I'm sorry.
I would only ask is what's best practice? And is that about what you're going to go to?
She knows best practice.
Okay.
I'll let her
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah,
my
that's
question.
really why we recommended the specific language that we did. If you'll note, Section 502, and I do believe that it was intended to ensure that there was no suggestion that somehow the city manager was supervising the mayor and the council members. The second paragraph, if you will, it's a single sentence of that section says, with the consent of the council, the city manager may serve as the executive of one or more such departments, offices, or agencies. Even if you think that there's some lack of clarity there, I believe that that provision in the charter would allow you to designate this duty to the city manager by ordinance, that he would be supervising the staff members that provide your services.
In terms of
I'm sorry, but I read it differently, but I think, I think we need an ordinance. I do think we need an ordinance clarifying that the city manager oversees the staff, so there's no, again, ambiguity on this, so I would make that recommendation tonight.
I agree with you, and that's why we put it in this
Okay,
ordinance.
and it sounds like this might fold into the ordinance that is currently under consideration as refers to the city manager. So if we could maybe just take section or item L of that ordinance and maybe elaborate on it a little bit and tie it to 502 so that we have some clarity.
Absolutely.
I think that'll be a good solution.
Okay. Be happy to do that. In addition, I think existing section 070, the authority to file and prosecute small claims, is already in there, and so we just repeated it. And section 080 is, I think, word for word, almost exactly what you've already got in your code with respect to the inability of the mayor and council to interfere with the manager's supervision over his employees. So that is the third of those three. Are there any other questions about those three?
Could you just repeat which sections you went through?
Again, these were in the ordinance that deals with section 2.02 regarding the city manager, and I don't have the right page numbers, but section 2.02.070 is the authority to file and prosecute small claims, which is essentially repeat from what you already have in your code, and 2.02.080 on the next page ensures that the mayor and city council do not interfere with the appointment of the city manager or the direction of the city manager's employees. And that's exactly what you have right now.
Okay, and I think that might require, again, some clarification. Obviously, we have council staff, the mayor has staff. I think there needs to be some degree of clarity in terms of the delineation of authority.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
I see 202080, and again, it appears somewhat contradictory to section 502.
Councilman Valdivia.
Bringing this in fair balance, Mark, you had just said about 15 minutes ago that you understand the roles that we play to report to our constituents in our respective wards. And you fear the trouble that we would probably cause if you were to start meddling so much so that we would be handcuffed.
Yeah.
So in fair balance, I think the language that, Mr. Nickel, is it appropriate then that we talk about section 502, but also to expand on page, what was it, 23, section L? Expand what Councilman Nickel had said, but add the clarifier that it's in a supportive role. You're there to provide, the basics so that these employees that serve us
Yeah.
can still perform their duty.
Absolutely. In fact, it says in here that I will provide you that support.
Right.
So it'd be contradictory if in providing that support, I didn't let them provide the support.
Correct.
And, this is one of those things where you want the code to be clear, but you're dealing with somebody who's done this in 6 cities, and I will tell you, I haven't made it this far by not letting the staffs that support councils and mayors do their job. And so I don't worry about my capacity to do that, but these things have to last beyond current managers, I understand that. And if there's something we can do to clarify that, to make sure that that's the intention, I'm all for it,
And I think in keeping with Councilman Nickel is that you've also got something that might change in the future.
Yeah.
And so helping to memorialize this here allows us to have that reference for the future, to be able to say,
I
well,
agree.
this is what the council intended.
We can work on that between now and Monday,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Oh, and with the, it'll go out with the agenda.
Yeah.
that's tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm not here.
okay. You want to do it on the size?
We'll get
No,
her
I want to
done.
do it before Monday,
Yeah.
not tomorrow.
Okay. So with that, can we go back to the work plan? Because I'd like to work with you and have you review it with me to make sure that we are prioritizing correctly.
Councilman Schritt.
One quick question from something you said earlier, and I don't know if it's relevant or appropriate at this point, but I made a note here. You made a comment that you could rewrite our ordinances and we'd have half as many.
I've never seen a code book that's, I mean, it's like four or five
That's-
reams of paper.
Okay, and that's exactly my point. And isn't that what we should be trying to be the goal of what we're doing here, to reduce that in size? And shouldn't that be the goal of what we're
Absolutely,
doing here?
that's
is to
my
cut
goal.
those-
Yeah.
Cut those down to a manageable, more reasonable size.
Right, and so that's certainly my goal going forward in terms of my task, which is to help you implement your charter. And I know that Mr. Sines and his staff are also, and we're working together so that if I see something and I'm questioning, do we need this and could we do it this other way, that I will be talking to your city attorney and his staff, and they will then carry that forward and bring that to you. If it isn't directly related to implementation of his charter, it doesn't stop me from talking to him, but I don't consider my task to be fiddling around with your other code sections.
Councilman Valdivia.
Fred, I respect what you're saying. The intention of the voters, I think the spirit of many of the voters was for a new charter. And I think that if we give you full liberty to kind of cut it in half or cut it into a third, we also need to contemplate the costs associated with that, and I don't know if we're ready for that.
And that's exactly
So-
why I'm recommending that if I see something.
Yeah, so my position is, continue to your stead of, the inconsistencies or consistencies of how we can get this on. The most priority would be my directive is trying to pare down what we need to, but I'm not comfortable with just hunting for more municipal type of ordinances so we can just cut it in half to say to the newspapers, God bless our newspaper reporter, that we've cut it in half. I
No,
think that does us no good.
No, I
That isn't
appreciate
at all
that.
my
So-
intention or my comment. That wasn't at all what I
So-
was trying to say.
So my position is, I appreciate you, Ms. Barlow. Thank you for your professional services. We have an agreement with you, and we're looking forward to more great work that you're going to provide us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
So the first box, if you will, under our work plan product are the general provisions regarding governance. And as you can see, we've already just gone through the first three ordinances that we believe need to be adopted in some form to reflect those changes. So we have, let's see, what do we have here? Okay, so you got the update, you got the three ordinances, and we're moving forward at the next meeting. So I would expect with appropriate changes that you would be adopting at your first meeting in April, those three ordinances, and maybe even the one that we'll get to at the end. And they will become effective 30 days after adoption, and we'll go running off with those. So the next set of work plan / product category is council and mayor. And some of these are routine. Some of them really aren't routine. They're very important policy decisions. Time, place, manner of calling meetings. You have an existing ordinance, and we actually brought, I'll give it to you at the end. I don't want to distract you from our discussion. But we did actually draft an ordinance that deals with this particular subject as well as some of the way that the meetings are conducted. So one of the things that your charter says is that you are going to adopt a code of conduct for the council. We think that you could do that in a number of ways. Right now, there are provisions in your existing ordinance that deal with how you will treat each other at council meetings, and that's in the draft that we have. You don't have to have it in that code. If you decided, as you go forward with this implementation process, that you would rather have a policy or a resolution or something that goes beyond that one provision in the existing ordinance, we can certainly put all of it into one document. There's nothing magic about it being in the ordinances.
Councilman Nichol.
If I recall, we had an ordinance in 2010 that it, yeah, 252. Oh, it was a resolution. Okay. So that's not part of our municipal code then? It's just purely a resolution? Yeah, I thought we had had several different...
That was a resolution.
Okay, so it's not binding?
It's binding until it's repealed.
Okay. I think, you know, and I get your point, we don't want to go fishing for a bunch of stuff to just willy-nilly clean up. But I think that might be a good starting point in terms of this, and maybe we can codify it in terms of an ordinance as opposed to a resolution.
You can absolutely do that,
Okay,
sure.
because I think we've got some things floating around out in the ether of prior council decisions that would be nice to tidy up and roll into this item.
So what we will prepare for a subsequent meeting then is a packet so you can see what all those prior actions were. I know you have a resolution that you also adopted, so we'll collect all those and then provide those to you in advance so that when we come back to another study session, we can actually discuss those and talk about the form and manner that you want to adopt that
All right,
in.
thanks.
And the work plan does indicate conduct of meeting as an ordinance in this document, so.
Right. So, and again, at the end, I'll give you the current draft, and I welcome your input on it. Order of succession and vacancy of mayor, that's an issue that we will need to address. Council vacancies is, there are some provisions in the charter, so we're going to need to address that. And staggering terms of office. Again, that's reflected in the charter, but it's probably a good idea to have it codified as well. So we are looking at coming back to you with ordinances by June. To the extent that we can get input from you tonight, that would be extremely helpful. If we can't get that input tonight, then we would try and get it at either a subsequent regular meeting or at a subsequent workshop.
Councilman Nichol.
Yeah, reviewing some of the prior discussion leading up to the placement of the charter on the ballot, I know there was some discussion on the issue of filling vacancies in regard to what is in the elections code, which, if I recall, the general law city, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the general law city approach is to appoint as opposed to a special election. Am I mistaken on that?
A general law city has the option of appointing or calling a special election.
Oh, either or.
Yeah,
Okay.
depending upon how much of the term is remaining. If it's more than 2 years, I think they kind of have to call an election. But typically what they'll do is they'll maybe appoint until they can get an election scheduled.
Because up till now, we've always had a special election for vacancies, so I think I'd like to hear when this is brought forward, sort of the pro and con of each of those approaches, because my default is not to change if not necessary. If there's a legitimate reason to appoint, then I'll consider that.
Yeah, so usually the issue is the cost of an election, and particularly if a vacancy occurs near to the time when there would be a new election for that position anyway, the cost of engaging in a special election. Now, if it's really, really close, then, you know, you just end up at the next election and you just end up keeping that vacancy. But it's in that sort of midterm between the 2-year and the, 88 days, basically, for calling elections. So, yeah, we'll bring forward all of those options to you.
Councilman Valdivia.
Regarding the council vacancies, my position would be Ms. Barlow, that similar to Henry, I think when we contemplate the vacancy, here's my position, is now we're also voting on representation of a specific ward, which has its own unique demographic, has its own unique constituency base, and its own kind of landmarks that should be respected. So I would be in favor of not having necessarily a special appointment process, but running a special election. I think the voters deserve it. I think the base of that particular ward of the city, they need to have their say and their input. I do absolutely agree that if there should maybe be some clarifier, if in fact if it's such a close window, we hold the seat either vacant until the opportunity for that special election. Like if it's in 4 to 6 months, okay, maybe we can kind of do without, and still understand and appreciate the values of that respected board and the vacancy of that seat that it creates, and certainly represent that particular ward.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the people, when they voted for this charter, understood that this was a change in how you might fill vacancies, that at least it might be a change in terms of you would do it by ordinance, you will establish by ordinance how it will be done, as opposed to automatically there will be a special election. So with that in mind, I think if we bring forward to you all the available options, you'll be able to make that policy call. Okay, so staggered terms of office, as I mentioned, is already called out, but we will just simply codify that. Finally, if I could, I would like to distribute the draft that Mrs. Miller and I have been working on.
And part of the reason why we're suggesting that you talk about this now is the charter had established your regular meeting dates, so we either need to recodify this as your regular meeting date, or there's been some discussion about possibly considering a change in dates. But we think this is something that you probably want to be discussing now, give some input on, so that we can bring this when once you've had a chance to give us some policy direction.
That's all right.
I
I
offered.
need the walking. I need to get my steps in, you know?
She's got her Fitbit on and she's measuring her.
All right, so basically, yeah, what I've included here is, I haven't changed the date and time. It just reiterates what you currently have. Having said that, this is wide open for you to make a change to. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Randall.
Councilman Nichol.
I do have some comments. I personally am not a fan of our Monday meeting schedule. I think it limits the opportunity for council members to engage with our city manager in enough time to really get a sense of what we're going to be deciding. We often get our agenda packets late Thursday afternoon. Everybody's gone on Friday. There's nobody around on the weekend, and I don't want to be bothering our city manager over the weekend. I think an ideal system would be to have at least Monday available for council members to confer. I think that streamlines the process and ensures we don't have difficult council meetings, or at least mitigates to some degree that potential difficulty. So I would strongly advise that we look at what's the best practice. I think a Tuesday meeting, Wednesday meeting would be fine with me, but the Monday meetings are just, they don't produce the result that I think is intended.
Councilman Valdivia.
My experience personally is I get the packet delivered on that Friday, and it almost obligates a volunteer councilman that is a father to two and a provider for my entire family to have that working weekend where I'm deep in the books, and it pins me down, and I'm a family man. And so now I'm obligated not to kind of go on those vacations with the family. I'm here working the phones at the house that Saturday or Sunday, or I try to give my family at least one day of my weekend. So I'm in agreement. I think allowing us, and I don't want to necessarily bother you guys. You guys have a life. You guys have a weekend. You guys have earned it, but so have council members. We have a life. We want our quality of life. We give to this community. And yeah, we signed up for it. The argument's going to be, well, you signed up for it. You knew what you're getting into. I get that. But let's have some compromise here. Moving it to that Tuesday or a Wednesday, it doesn't matter, allows for us to kind of have that breather, spending time with the family, doing what we got to do, especially since a good majority of the council here are full-time employees. So it's our time to run the errands, to do what we got to do, or to either have that interaction and dialogue with a town hall meeting. I work my weekends, sometimes on a town hall meeting with my constituents on a Saturday morning. I spend a lot of time in my district on Saturday mornings because I can't sometimes during the week. So what I'm getting at is, yeah, I think maybe if we could move it to a Tuesday or Wednesday, giving us a little bit more flexibility and freedom to contact staff, to work with you guys. It would, I think the end product, the byproduct is we're having not so stressful meetings.
Right.
You know, we don't want meat at the cage, right? And we're kind of just breathing down your throat on Monday morning because we got deadlines and we got legal counsel workshops at 2. And where's Gary and where's staff? And you know, our time is, you know, I don't have that flexibility to just, you know, call a day off. Others do, and I respect that. They're retired. Great, good for you. But the majority of the council certainly has a work obligation, and we have to, you know, provide for our families. And I hope you consider that. Thank you.
Councilman Nichol?
One other question that was posed to me, given the size and complexity of our city, does it make sense to have that first and third kind of structure, or would it make more sense to have every 2 weeks? So there's some consistency in terms of what we're doing, so we don't have those meetings where we're trying to condense 3 weeks of business into 2. I don't know. I'm deferring to our staff. Would it make sense just to go to a regular every other week schedule?
No.
It would mean 2 more meetings a year is what it would mean.
Yeah, it depends on the year. I've done it both ways. There's some people think it's easier. I'm talking about people in the public. Think it's easier for them to know, okay, it's going to be the first and third. I can always look that up on the calendar, whereas they might not remember whether the meeting was last week or not. So I think most councils do first and third or second and fourth. And then you've got the councils that do every week, and I hope you're never one of those.
We can't even get the 2-week agenda.
Yeah,
Oh,
no.
gosh, that's all we do.
But so I think it's uncommon to go every other week, but I've seen it done.
It seems that it also might reduce the amount of time for workshops, because you're now adding that additional 2 or 3 weeks, and oftentimes we need the time to have these workshops. I might also indicate that Tuesday is probably a preferred date for the purpose of the sitting mayor who will be involved in those regional meetings, because those are oftentimes on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And so who's ever sitting in this position would then oftentimes not be able to meet those, because there is conflicts, and it's not just necessarily a board meeting, there may be committee meetings. So a Tuesday probably allows for that flexibility on both parts, so that those positions that the mayor is obligated to attend can then be satisfied. City Attorney, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Councilman Valdivia, indicating that some will object that that's what you signed up for. That's what you signed up for under the old charter. This is the new charter, And God bless the new charter, because one of the objectives of the drafters of the charter was to give flexibility to the council. And this is a great example of the flexibility that will be allowed to accommodate the current council, and, future councils can change it according to their best wishes and so on. So that's one of the advantages this new charter has over the old charter's rigidity.
And one of the things that Mark and I were just talking about, you may want to consider moving to the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, because we do have a challenge at the beginning of the year. We're starting a new calendar year, the holidays, and it gives us a chance for our month-to-month warrant registers and things like that. So that actually may make it a little easier if we were to move to the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, and it still avoids a lot of those regional meetings that I know the mayor and others attend.
Additionally, it also avoids those Monday holidays and then having to change it. So you can set that schedule at the beginning of the year, and it doesn't have to change. And it allows for planning of vacations and time off with the family that you want to take advantage of.
Right. So we encourage you all to think about that issue. That obviously, I could have just left blanks there, but I thought I'm just going to stick in what's there now, and you guys will do what you want to do. I did add into this first paragraph, or such other location within the city as may be properly noticed. And I did that because, for example, and this is regular meetings, I understand, but I know that we're currently looking at relocating from City Hall for some period. And so I wanted to give you some flexibility built into the ordinance so that if necessary, you could call your regular meetings at a different location. Same in the second paragraph there. Meetings of boards, commissions, and committees, what it previously, or what it currently says is that you're going to set forth the time and place and dates of the meetings of all those boards and commissions in a resolution. And while it might be convenient for everyone to have it all in one resolution, because some of your bodies are established via charter, some of them, maybe it seemed to me that you wanted more flexibility, so I have just said one or more ordinances or resolutions as you deem appropriate. And then probably the biggest change that we've made is in Section 2.58, and I've made this change because of some existing case law and felt that it was important to just call your attention to it. 2.58.100, disruptive conduct at meetings. The first section deals with your interactions with each other, Section 100. And so I've just made some changes to that to comply with existing case law. And what that case law says is it's not enough for your speech to be rude or contemptuous or insolent or those kinds of words. It actually has to disrupt the meeting. And so this language has been changed as a result of that. Now, you do have a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you govern yourselves. So this is an area where you may decide that you want to take this out altogether and put it into whatever code of conduct you decide you're going to adopt, and in whatever manner you decide you're going to adopt it. However, in Section 105, which deals with members of the public, this is a particularly important issue, and I'm actually going to change the title to disruption as opposed to interruption. Again, cases tell us that it is not enough for someone to interrupt. They have to actually disrupt. And so one of the really good things about your existing code is it says, we're going to call your attention to it and give you a chance to conform before we throw you out, basically. And so these language changes were made to comply with a fairly recent case, unfortunately out of one of my own cities. And the final change in that section where I've added the words or word is because, again, from that same case, in terms of how they interpret your willingness to parse and eliminate words or phrases. There was a big debate in that case about whether the council really meant that they would have adopted everything but insolent had they, and so I want to make sure we weren't limited to phrases, but we got right down to the or words in terms of our, the severability. Holidays, I added the word business day because, for example, Thanksgiving holiday is followed by another holiday for most people. So because I wasn't sure when you might be selecting when your meetings were, I wanted to make sure it was clear that we were going to the next business day. And then I also added, again, to give you flexibility, except as determined by the city council. So you might, for example, say, rather than having the Tuesday after Labor Day, for whatever reason, you're going to go dark that week, in the first week of September or the first 2 weeks of September for vacations, or some councils do that in August. So I just wanted to give you as much flexibility as possible. And I think the last provision is simply changes to the title of the council. So this is for you to digest and consider. We're not asking you to take any action or give any direction on it tonight. We will bring it back to you, but we certainly wanted to get you started thinking about these important issues.
Assistant City Manager?
Although certainly we can bring it back to you unless you would like to give us direction tonight about
You
the
certainly
meeting
can.
changes. And then we would make these changes and present it with the other ordinances.
Councilman Nichol?
Yeah, well, I think, again, for purposes of consistency and streamlining, would it make sense to roll the intention of Section 302, referring to the Code of Conduct, into 2.58.100? Could that whole section more or less constitute the Code of Conduct section? So we don't have different sections addressing what proper conduct is on the
At the
part of
meetings.
council members?
Absolutely, we can certainly do that, and if you like, we can elaborate on the provision.
I think it would just make sense to roll that entire Code of Conduct ordinance into that section.
Yeah, and we can certainly do that. Let me suggest that we can bring you some policies and ordinances, resolutions that other cities have on that issue, as well as the existing resolution that you already have, so that you can sort of tell us, do you want to just take the resolution you have us plug it in here, and then you can doctor it on the dais? We can do that. Whatever direction you want to give us, we're happy to carry out.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Valdivia?
No, Kim, I agree. I think I'm not so eager to be on the hunt for what other cities are doing. I think we have enough on the Code of Conduct going back to early 1980s, all the way the timeline to 2010 and to present day. And if we could get and merge those two documents and present it and append it here in the 2.58, yeah, that's sufficient.
That's what we'll do then, unless there's an objection.
Unless there's an objection, right. So I think we need to consider our days. I'm still reasonable on compromise of time. I certainly would appreciate, I think working council members here would appreciate it after 5 p.m. I think our citizens would appreciate it. So I'd like to make a recommendation that we go to the Tuesday, 2nd and 4th, based on what you said, Mark and others, that might be a best practice. It certainly allows the sitting mayor to attend regional meetings, which are great import for our community and citizenry. So I would like to at least be bold enough to suggest that Tuesday, 2nd and 4th. It gives us a lot of freedom to call you guys on Monday and still enjoy our weekend. I'm open to at least reason here, but if we could have it after 5 p.m., an open session, that certainly is the best practice throughout most communities here in the Inland Empire. I think San Bernardino City and Riverside City still have meetings before 5 p.m. And so if we could fall in line with I know a lot of cities do have their meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday, but something a little bit more reasonable so that we can at least start the closed session. Gary, I think we've talked kind of offline on a couple of new ways in which we can restructure closed session. The need for really having such a large window on the legal time. I think if we, and I appreciate what you had suggested, and I hope I'm not putting words into that conversation that you and I had. This was several weeks ago. But I think there's convenient ways for us to cut down our legal workshop that precedes a city council meeting and still affords the flexibility for the city attorney to do his job and manage those affairs of the legal department and provide us kind of executive summaries at the legal session. So what I'm getting at is Tuesday, 2nd and 4th, and sometime after 5, and, to be determined and argued on merit, on principle with the actual opening time. I'm reasonably open to engage that dialogue.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and I'm sure Mr. Sines has input on this, but yeah, typically your closed session, normally what you'd want to do is you say if you're going to hold it before your regular meetings, which you do now and most cities do, it'll be routinely called an hour before your regular meeting start time, your public meeting start time. And should the occasion arise where you need to extend it for, make it 2 hours or make it an hour and a half, that can be done on a case-by-case basis. Or when you have a particularly long or complex closed session, it can be done by special meeting.
Yeah, I think we can probably expedite our closed sessions and get through more quickly. There are methods we can explore and employ to accomplish that. I think also by having meetings on Tuesday and giving council an opportunity to ask questions of staff on Monday, that will expedite our open sessions as well, so that there's not so much conversation necessary. So I think there's ways to accomplish that, and I think it's worth exploring or experimenting with. It's always flexible, I believe.
And many other communities, in those instances where you have to go longer than an hour, you can reconvene your closed session after the open session. So we always have that as an opportunity as well if there is something that goes long.
Most of the other boards that I sit on, it's typically no longer than an hour. Councilmember Valdivia serves on the IVD and Sevilla board, I believe. Yes. Excuse me, I actually called one of our officers the chief the other day, so.
That's promotion.
No, it was fatigue. But most of them are concluded within an hour, and oftentimes even less than an hour, so.
So with that, might I suggest if there is direction, consensus from the council, we could bring forward this proposed ordinance with the recommended additions and modifications that I've heard from you this evening as early as your next meeting. And if there is a consensus to move to the 2nd and 4th Tuesday, perhaps whatever time you decide you start your meeting, we would schedule it for an hour closed session with the regular public meeting to follow, and make sure that there's flexibility to continue the closed session either after the regular meeting or at another time.
Councilman Shred.
I can live with the Tuesdays, 2nd and 4th, that's fine. Timing, we'll discuss that at the dais, I think, when it comes time, so you can leave that blank.
Then we will present that ordinance with a blank then at time, if that's the preference.
Also gives the other council members that aren't here a chance to weigh in on it.
Right. So, next steps. We'll be making some changes to the 3 draft ordinances that you've already seen, as well as the newest one that we've just discussed. We'll be bringing them to you at your next council meeting. And unless you have some change in direction from what we've presented you with in terms of the work plan we would continue to carry out the plan and refine it, keep you up to speed on changes that we make. If we find something that's particularly important, or of course at any time, this council is free to say, you know, there's this particular issue that we want you to expedite and move forward ahead. And what I ultimately would like to do, once we get a little further along, is really bring you what I would, in the construction world, they call a critical path schedule that would show you, here's our calendar, and this is what we're doing, and here's where we expect it all to look, so that you can kind of look in one place in terms of what the priorities are, what the timeline is, what you can expect to see as we go through this process.
And then I
We
think
have-
in terms of our next steps, we would anticipate providing information to you on boards and commissions, you know, a list of all of your various boards and commissions, when they're meeting, that type of information, as well as information on some of these vacancy issues in advance, so you have a chance to review that, and then hold another discussion or work session related to those two specific items.
Councilmember Charette?
What we've done here tonight, and it sounds like we're wrapping up, but there's 5 more pages of your plan.
Oh, I can, well,
No, that wasn't my, that's not my suggestion. My question is, are we going to have 5 more workshops?
I hope not.
You know, and that's really
Not that I'm
kinda
not
where I'm
enjoying
going.
myself. I actually am enjoying
That's
myself
where
immensely.
I'm just, and I know that you maybe can't answer that, but I mean, we're not going to have a workshop, a 2-hour workshop for every 4 ordinances that we have to deal with.
No.
Okay.
I certainly anticipate that the issue of vacancies and commissions, because you do have so many and you're going to want to go through them all, I do anticipate that that will take up at least 1 workshop. We would certainly try to do that all in 1 workshop. And there may be 1, potentially 2 others.
2 or 3 more.
Yeah.
And then some of these items, we will just provide regular updates to you. Some of them are us meeting with employee groups, us, you know, developing administrative procedures and things, and so we'll just be reporting back to you on those, and we can do that at regular sessions periodically, and certainly through memorandum and other communications.
I'm happy to. You're paying me by the hour. I'm fine.
Councilmember Valdivia is sitting very close to you.
Can I just make one suggestion if we don't go any further? One of the things you do, of course he is. One of the things that was called out was this advisory committee on compensation. And so when we bring forward, or when we talk about those commissions and committees, we would include that. I would encourage you to start thinking now about what it is that what you're thinking about, what that should look like, how many members it should have, how they should be appointed, so that you can give us some direction. I could take a wild stab at it, but I do think it's something that we need some direction from you on. Not tonight, but when we talk about those issues.
And Councilman Shred, on page 2 of the work plan, it does point out a possible mayor and city council study session in June. So that may very well be the next time that we do this. Could you talk a little bit about the transition for the city treasurer's role? And
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think the charter committee intended that the way the charter was worded would essentially eliminate the elected city treasurer position. The charter actually says no words at all about the city treasurer and that position. And I had some concern about whether you could eliminate an elected official's position by implication. So we are actually doing some research on that. It's possible that we could need to do a charter amendment, but I'm hoping that we can find some authority that will make clear that the way it was worded about the elected officials of the city shall be is sufficient to address that issue. But absolutely, I understand that that is of concern.
Councilman Nichol?
Well, having read some of the other measures that have been passed in the state and seeing how they've transpired. My understanding is in a lot of those cases where they've transitioned from an elected to an appointed, there's been voluntary resignations in some cases. Has Mr. Kennedy resigned?
No.
No. No,
No.
the issue isn't whether Mr. Kennedy continues to serve, because he, according to the charter, will continue to serve until his term is up. My concern is that it's clear that the intent was to eliminate the position of elected city treasurer and have all those functions be performed by the finance staff under the direction of the
Okay,
city
well, I guess
manager.
I was given some mistaken information. My understanding was Mr. Kennedy was in fact planning to.
It's mine.
There was,
He
I had
may.
written a memo, remember the big, long
Yeah.
memo I wrote early in the year? I said in there that I had been told that he was retiring, which suggested to me he was resigning, but he never did.
I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, he never did. So my suggestion is we talk to him.
Yeah.
You know, he may be sitting there watching us saying,
Right.
I have an answer to that question. So why don't we get hold of him and ask him? He's a great gentleman, and I think he probably wants what's best for the city.
And remember, though, this
I
does,
know I'm not part of this, but I can answer part of that.
We'll have a place for public comments in just a moment.
so I think what Kim Barlow is, though, referring to is Mr. Kennedy may certainly have plans about his interest in continuing with the city for whatever time period that is, whether he resigns at some point or he completes his term. The greater issue that she's doing legal research on now is whether or not, regardless of what the intent was, because we certainly understand the intent. We realize
question.
it's clear. You shifted all the functions to the finance department, but she's researching whether or not you can actually eliminate an elected position by implication, which is in effect what happened in the charter. So we will have to come back to you on that with some additional legal analysis, and she has her staff doing that now. But he did not resign.
No, but he could.
Oh, he could, yes, he absolutely could resign.
Councilman Shred.
Not related to the city treasurer, but to the other two elected positions that will serve their time.
Yes.
But,
I haven't resigned.
no, well, would you?
No.
No. Well, you don't know if you don't ask, and we're going to ask. No, what I'm asking is that under the present charter, though they're going to stay in that position, assuming they stay in that position for the full term, they still will be, what's the word I want to use, behaving or not behaving, acting. They will be working for. Heretofore, they've been elected, and you can't touch them in anything they do in their offices.
Go ahead, Kim.
But,
Yeah, I think she needs to answer your question.
okay, you got my
her
question. Do
read
you
it.
understand my question?
Yeah. Right now, according to the charter, they stay in those positions without change. As I mentioned earlier, some duties may be shifted, but they remain autonomous elected officials until such time as they retire/resign, their terms are complete, or they are recalled from office. Those are the only options.
So their office is autonomous as well? I mean, the staff within that office, those people are all autonomous and answer strictly to that elected official?
As the charter is worded, I would say yes.
Okay, that's all. I don't have a problem. I'm just wanting to have clarity on it. Thank you.
The only thing I would say about that is that the city council, when it adopts a budget, does have some control over what is going to be allocated to those elected officials in terms of performing what duties they perform. And when you have that rare situation in a city, not this one, but in a city where you've had that kind of transition and you get somebody who doesn't cooperate at all, I've watched councils use the budget as the tool to deal with that. So.
Councilman Nichol.
Well, another question that was posed to me is when the term does expire, what happens?
With respect to the city clerk and the city attorney,
Yeah.
I'm presuming that by that time, you will have done a little bit of work in advance in terms of evaluation of potential compensation and other issues. I am presuming that one of the things that you will want to have happen are ordinances that relate to the duties of those two positions, which will, after the expiration of the existing terms, be appointive.
Yeah, well, my thinking is, when do we do that?
Well, I would suggest, because you want to have some, I mean, you don't want Mr. Sains to leave and not have somebody ready to step
Right.
in. So, and likewise with the city clerk. So typically, you would start your recruitment process, you would get your compensation evaluation done, you would get your ordinances in place that would then take effect as soon as the appointees.
Would it make sense to start getting those ordinance put in place now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I'm saying that once you've done that, then within some appropriate time that is necessary for the kind of recruitment and search that I'm sure that you will want to do, that you will begin that process to recruit for candidates who you could consider for appointment for city attorney and for city clerk before the expiration of the incumbent's terms.
And also, to be clear, when that transition occurs, the current staff of the city clerk and city attorney will transition to the direct oversight management of the city manager.
Of the person that you appoint to those appointed positions. So they will oversee their department.
Because that gets back to 502 that we were discussing earlier, that I'm not clear on terms of who directs who under this new charter. My understanding was essentially all staff will go to, where in the charter does it say that the city clerk and city attorney under this charter will have direct control over their staff?
They would be the executive officer.
They're the executive officers. In that 502 section, it refers to the executive officers. That's what it's referring to. Those positions, or those people that you appoint to executive positions, one of them would be the city attorney, another the city clerk. They would be responsible for their departments.
Okay, but
And
the
this-
mayor is not considered an executive officer.
Not in the same context.
Not in the same context. I mean, he wouldn't have the same robust staff that a city clerk's office would have, or a city attorney's office potentially would have.
And I would fully anticipate that your city manager will work closely with the city attorney and with the city clerk in terms of all the decisions that your city manager has to bring to you, budgeting and personnel and job descriptions and all of those things. But the day-to-day supervision over those different department staffs will be with those department heads, just like your Parks and Recreation Director will supervise their staff.
Henry, or Mr. Nichols.
And the work plan, if I could point out, does call out the city attorney position and city clerk in the work plan to deal with.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're,
It is confused.
yeah.
I see the confusion in your eyes, and it's because it's confusing. And I could point to cities where mayors have actual executive authority over their staff, where it's a council manager city, Pasadena, for instance. I believe that the deputy mayor in Pasadena works for the mayor, not for the city manager. I'm not positive of that. We could double check that, but I think there are cities where you would find that. What happens to an organization, though, when you have too many different executives is that you start having problems internally of different personnel policies and practices occurring. And within a city hall building, if you've got two different camps, you can have different treatment between employees, and it can cause real confusion and morale issues. And I think it's the best practice to try to put them all under one set of personnel rules and authorities. And that's why you say the city manager. The direction we got tonight was try to come up with some language that clarifies the intent is still to provide the services that are needed in those positions to the elected officials. And I think that's the solution to it. But the city attorney and city clerk, if they're appointed by the council, is typically those two offices will have their own staff. And, you know, I can't supervise an office of attorneys. I could conceive, a lot of times the city attorney is actually works for the city manager, but in our charter, it works for the council. And so that does create the potential for that differences in policies that I'm talking about. I'm not anticipating that. That's the way our charter is set up, and I'm happy to work with it, whatever it's set up. But it is confusing because it is different with different functions.
Yeah, I would strongly urge the council by ordinance to ensure that the personnel rules cover all employees equally. And I think that that is totally consistent with the language in Section 502 of the Charter. The day-to-day management by the city attorney of his staff is one thing, but having a whole different set of rules is a completely different thing.
And ultimately, you will evaluate their performance, and one of the things you will be evaluating them on is the management of their resources that you provide to them and their staff.
Councilman Schritt?
So to be simple, because I'm a simple person, do they essentially, with all due respect, become directors of that department, just as you said?
Yes.
Just like you said, a Parks and Rec director, a personnel director, a communications director, whatever.
Yes.
They essentially become the head of a department, so they still, but different than, for example, HR director does not work for us, they work for you. But these two offices, they would be working for us.
They would report directly to the council, but yes, otherwise, I think that you've described it perfectly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No further discussion on this. We will now have time for public comments. Sandra Ibarra.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and fellow members who are here. I just want to make a suggestion, and I know it was discussed at the last council meeting regarding the water department. If we can rush it also, besides waiting until 2018. I think that's the deadlines that I'm seeing here on the work plan. The reason being is in August 2015, the water department increased sewer rates on the citizens for the water department, the customers. And they tried doing another increase, and their excuse was that that our infrastructure needed to be fixed. That has not started, and it's already been 2 years of our rates having gone up. Water rates just went up as well a couple months ago, so that's why we would like to see the actual work starting with the water department. And right now, their hands are being held because they're working with the city, and that was the main reason they're falling behind. So that was my only suggestion I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Porter. Jim Smith.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council people, and of course, the public. I just wanted to compliment you on this excellent workshop tonight. I think we really took a big step forward, and I think probably the most important comment was made by the city attorney. That certainly was part of the recommendation of the new charter committee, is to give the flexibility to the council to make some really important decisions as far as the city is concerned. I wanted to acknowledge, if I might, Phil Savage, who's the chairman of the committee that put this together, and also Rabbi Cohen, who was a very faithful member, and they certainly deserve a lot of credit for the work they did. And I certainly, it goes without saying that we're so glad that that Mark is still with us. It's great. Thank you so much for taking this step forward and doing that. On a somber note, I don't know it's really been publicized, but as you know, Evelyn Alexander passed away, and many of the council people knew her personally. Her services are this Friday morning. It's a simple graveside ceremony at 10 o'clock at Mountain View Cemetery, and afterwards there'll be a reception at the Native Sons of the Golden West building. So I'm sure it's open to the public. If you'd like to pay your respects to a wonderful citizen that we lost, feel free to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Savage, did you have something you wanted to
Mayor,
say?
until Phil gets to the podium, I'd like
Yeah.
to thank Jim for making that announcement about Evelyn Alexander's services, but I also wanted to let anyone that might be listening or that might be thinking about the Dr. Nag meeting that would have normally been held this Thursday night, that has been canceled. And so there will not be a Dr. Nag regular meeting this Thursday night. And the last council meeting, of course, I announced that there would be one, but there's not. I found that out, that there will not be one.
Thank you for that announcement. Mr. Savage, come to the podium.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And as was pointed out, I'm Phil Savage, was honored to serve as the chair of the Charter Committee, but that wasn't really the reason why I was going to make a comment when I did interrupted. Incidentally, I'd like to echo everything that Jim Smith just said. I really think this is sort of hard to believe to have it go through a boring workshop session to say that I feel excited. But it's exactly what I believe the Charter Committee intended, was to have the flexibility and the decisions and the tough things be made by you and not be locked in by charter rules that blocked you. So I think that's very good. But the only comment I was going to make, I was simply a friend of Dave Kennedy, and I discussed this very issues you were talking about with the treasurer and with him, because it seemed to me that it was an open, loose end left. And he basically simply said to me that he's looking forward to talking with the city manager and the finance department as to how best to work those things out. And he didn't commit to anything, but that was his comments to me. That was what I was going to respond.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. No other further comments at this time. Anything from the council? City manager, city attorney, city clerk? If not, this meeting is adjourned to our next regular joint meeting, the Mayor and Common Council, 2 p.m. Monday, March 20th. Thank you for your attendance. Drive safe.